Previously on Funny Science Fiction.
In case
Yes, I see the picture behind your head.
Hi, this is Art Bell, and welcome to the Funny Science Fiction Podcast.
The podcast where movie fans miss the futuristic special effects of claymation, come and complain. So our guest today is the founder of the Comedy Central Network. We're very excited to have a few moments to catch up with Art Bell. Welcome to the show, Art.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
Yeah, excellent. We're very glad to have you. You and I have been talking back and forth a little bit through emails, and so it's good to have a chance to sit here face to face and catch up with you. So to set the tone for our listeners, because we are a sci-fi podcast, we'd like to talk to you about your sci-fi interest and kind of where you are with this and things. So could you tell us what your favorite sci-fi shows and movies are, and what really piqued your interest into science fiction?
Well, I'll tell you what piqued my interest in science fiction was Isaac Asimov.
Okay.
Followed closely by Ray Bradbury. I mean, I was addicted to those guys as a kid. I read everything they wrote. I thought I, Robot was a work of genius. I still do. And so, yeah, I was kind of a nerd as a kid. So I read a lot. And that's where that started. I did also grow up on a steady diet of 1950s sci-fi films, all the UFO films and the black and white sci-fi films that were really kind of badly disguised criticisms of communism and the communist threat in America, invasion of the body snatchers and all that.
Yeah.
So I kind of cut my teeth on that. And of course, it was Star Trek. I was in seventh grade when Star Trek was on. So, and that was like the coolest show ever. It wasn't on for too many years, though. A couple of years.
Right.
First. And again, sci-fi was really a big part of my life. And this may sound odd, because I liked science. Is that like an unusual combination?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I thought science was really cool, and I actually briefly considered becoming a scientist. And so I kept my eye on sci-fi when I was younger. I read Dune. That was a big one for me. Did that movie come out yet? The new one?
No, not yet.
Yeah, I figured I would have heard
later
about
this year.
Yeah, I think late 2021 it's supposed to come out. I think it's supposed to be a Christmas release.
Yeah, well, I hope it's good. The first one kind of crashed and burned. I think I ended my love affair with sci-fi that moment. But, hopefully...
You're not the only one.
Current sci-fi is a little harder to define. My kids are constantly putting me in touch with some sci-fi stuff, but I honestly can't tell you what it is, because a lot of times it's not stuff I like, and I end up going back and reading some of the older stuff. I mean, I just love Ray Bradbury. I thought he was such a great writer.
Okay.
Is that
so? No, that's
okay?
That's a great answer.
Okay.
So let me ask you this as a follow-up to what you just said. So you read Asimov and Bradbury. You were a fan of the 50s movies, and of course you mentioned iRobot. So my question for you is, what are your thoughts on the movie adaptation of iRobot? Did you watch that with Will Smith?
Yeah, I did. Honestly, I saw it such a long time ago now. When was that made? Like 6 or 7 years ago?
Well, I think a little longer, actually. I want to say it was around 2010.
Yeah, 2010. I honestly don't remember much about it. I remember thinking it was okay.
It's older
honestly,
than that.
I realize that's not much of an answer for you, but I just don't remember much about it.
Fair enough.
It was released in 2004.
Was it 2004?
2004.
Oh, man.
I know.
Okay. So you know what? I'm going to ask you, is it fair to ask me about what I thought of a movie 16 years ago?
Yes.
Can we not be okay with 2004 being 16
right.
years ago? That was
well. I'm going to ask you, what you thought about movies that were released in 1977, like Star Wars. So
you can do that. You could do that, but I was more impressionable then. I was probably multitasking when I saw iRobot on TV, doing a number of things, taking care of the kids, watching other stuff. You know how it all kind of fell apart.
I understand. And I'm having a hard time at the moment struggling to think that iRobot is older than my youngest child. So that scares me.
That's
time flies. Okay. Time flies, especially when you're a parent.
Yes, it does. That is absolutely true. All right. So yeah, so that's a nice broad base there that you have for sci-fi. Excellent.
So your website, your biography on your website also mentions that you did a little bit of musical theater, that you were Motel the Tailor in Fiddler on the Roof in college.
Muddle the Tailor, yes, that was my big starring role.
Which is
Semi-starring.
awesome. I mean, I'm a huge musical theater fan. Tim's not, but
No.
we'll get to the things that are wrong with Tim later. But was that like a one-off thing? Was that your only interest in musical theater, or is that still something that you go back to?
Well, it was my first real experience being in a musical where I had to sing and dance.
Mm-hmm.
I was always interested in theater, and I did some theater and performing and sketch comedy and stuff in college. Not too much in high school, but in college, I really got into it. And amazingly enough, in graduate school, I went to Wharton Grad, which is a business school. They had something called the Wharton Follies. And I know you're all excited about hearing about this, but the Wharton Follies was a satirical musical comedy put on by the students. Now, that may not sound too good, but when I went to the first meeting, what I found was a lot of people from Harvard Lampoon, a lot of people who were professional choreographers and musicians and actors who wanted to get the hell out of the entertainment business and onto Wall Street. Now, I was trying to go the other way. I was trying to get into the entertainment business.
Right.
But there we were, passing like ships in the night. And we put on a hell of a show. We were, they actually put us on the Today Show in the first year because we were notable. I'll leave it at that. And the second year I wrote the show, and it reminded me of how much I enjoyed writing comedy. But to see me dance in any of these shows was really not worth the price of the ticket. I was a pretty good singer. I have to say, Muddle the Tailor had to sing Wonder of Wonder, Miracle of Miracles. And I won't sing it for you, but you know the song, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very famous. And it's a solo. And there was a 35 or whatever it was piece orchestra in front of me. That was just the coolest thing that I could ever imagine. And I had to take singing lessons. I mean, when they cast me, they said, "Can you sing?" And I said, "No." "Can you dance?" "No." "I can act," I said. And they said, "Well, we're going to teach you how to sing and dance." And they gave me singing lessons. And I learned how to sing, and I forgot everything. But I did actually pull off the solo, and I really enjoyed it.
And see, now I'm just wondering if there's video of you dancing somewhere.
There is, but
I'll be back. I'll be off to Google. I'll be right back.
Back row. I was in the back row always.
Oh, okay. Well hidden then. Very good.
So we're always exploring the humor of things and what people like to find funny. So what are some effective ways to inject humor, whether it's in writing or in like a TV show, without destroying the pace of the story?
Well, you can make a joke about death. And I think that's, because everybody thinks about death a lot. And I find that it's disarming, but people like to laugh at things, jokes about death or, comic discussions about death. And again, I got my inspiration on that from National Lampoon. They did the death issue. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was an entire issue. And it was so unbelievably off the wall funny that I came to realize that death is really a great source of humor. And I think it's because everybody's just scared to death of death. Nobody wants to die. And people like you who are, shockingly young, don't even think about death. Whereas people like me, comes up more often. And then people who are in their 90s, it's like probably a preoccupation. So I will tell you, you want to hear a story about death in comedy?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I had to come up with the first, I was at Comedy Central and we needed a tagline. So I had to come up with a tagline. I hired a guy named Danny Abelson, who interestingly worked at National Lampoon. And he came back with a tagline. And he explained it to me, said, listen, the most important things in life are, and I said, money. He said, no. And then he went on, he said, it's about, the most important thing in life is we live and then we die. And that's really hard, but we can think about it. And I said, all right, what's the tagline? He said, the tagline is, we're all going to die, watch Comedy Central. And I thought that was the greatest tagline for us in the world. And I'll tell you why. Because I called my brother, who was 26 at the time, and I said, hey, Larry, what do you think of this tagline? He started cracking up. Right? He says, that's a great tagline. Then I called my father. And I said, hey, Dad, we just, we came up with this new tagline for the channel. I told him the tagline. My father says, you can't say that. That's not funny. Now, the whole idea of Comedy Central is we were trying to appeal to guys like my brother, not guys like my father, for all kinds of reasons, because we were young, edgy comedy. So there you go. Problem solved. And that was our first tagline.
Nice.
All right, so let's talk about Comedy Central, because that's what you're writing your book about. We'll get to that in just a moment, but let's talk about how you began the network. So what was the impetus behind starting this new broadcast network? Because I believe you were working at HBO at the time when you got started. And what are some of your favorite memories from that time period?
Well, the impetus for starting the channel was my love of comedy. And I talked about my love of science fiction and all the stuff I read about that. But I had a similar love for comedy that started when I started watching the Ed Sullivan Show, a weekly variety show, with the great Borscht Belt comics on. I saw Richard Pryor in his first appearance. I think I was 9 when he first appeared. Thought he was the funniest guy in the world, because he was. And I realized that comedy was very powerful. It's a very powerful way to communicate. And I wanted to get good at it, or at least understand it. So I started, really becoming a student of comedy nerd, we call it these days. And watched a lot of comedy, listened to the albums, Robert Klein, Bill Cosby. I know you can't mention his name in polite company, but Bill Cosby's album was a bestseller. Very funny.
Well, sure. Back in that day, yeah.
Yeah. And George Carlin. Those were the things we were listening to over and over and over as kids. And the more I got into it, the more I found I loved comedy. I was a little bit of a class clown, got thrown out of class a lot. But by the time I got to high school, I discovered satire and writing comedy. And I found I was not only pretty good at it, but I enjoyed it. And studied Swift and The Modest Proposal, where he suggested that starving people eat the kids because that would solve the problem. And I realized that Swift had done that essay and gotten in big trouble for it when he did it, Jonathan Swift. And but he made a huge impact. And I realized, again, comedy, satire can make a huge impact in society. And, that began my love affair with comedy.
All right.
All I can think about is chocolate cake.
What?
Chocolate cake.
Chocolate cake.
Yep.
Was it
The Cosby line about chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
Dad is
chocolate.
good.
Oh.
Dad is good. Dad is great. Dad gives us chocolate cake.
See,
Yeah.
but you
So
start
much
talking
great
about
stuff.
comedy and chocolate cake, and then I think about Fluffy and chocolate cake.
Well, yeah, there's that Gabriel Iglesias and what he's been, AKA Fluffy. Yeah, he's got
Because
that
I
chocolate.
have had the chocolate cake shake from Portillo's, and it is amazing.
I have not yet. I keep saying I'm going to.
There's supposed to be
But-
Portillo's coming to Michigan, but that's a
But then
different-
again, that's in Chicago and away from where I live. All right. So what are some of your favorite memories though about that time period and starting
Yeah.
off with the network?
When I went to HBO, there were a handful of cable channels. And HBO, by the way, was the coolest place to work in those days in television. They were kind of like Netflix today.
Okay.
They were like the first on the block. They were showing uncut movies, uncut comedy, uncensored. They were going to change television, and it was a pretty small company. It was like 1,000 people. And I got there because I knew finance and economics. Yes, that's true. My first job there was in the finance department, doing economic modeling to just determine how many subscribers they were going to have, which is not what I wanted to do in the entertainment business, but there I was. So ultimately, I had this job. I had this idea for a comedy network for a long time, since business school, really, when I wrote that comedy show. I said, hey, why isn't there an all comedy network? There's all music, there's all sports, there's all everything. No all comedy network? What's up with that? So I decided to pitch it to the head of HBO programming. Now, at that time, she was about 15 levels above me in the organization. I was just a punk financial kid and knew nothing about programming or anything else. But it was a small company. I made an appointment with her. I said, I want to have a meeting to pitch or something. And the secretary said, fine. So I go down there. I say, her name was Bridget Potter. I say, Bridget, I think HBO should do an all comedy channel, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week comedy. She said, stop right there. That is the worst idea I've ever heard. And I'll tell you why. Because we got plenty of comedy on TV already. We don't need more. And who's going to sit around and watch 24 hours of comedy? Nobody. And are you really going to get any decent comedians to go on an all comedy channel like Robin Williams. Whoopi is not going on the channel. Billy Crystal is not going on the channel. The managers would die before they let them on the channel. So no, you don't. And then she finished with, you don't know anything about comedy and you don't know much about television, but thanks for stopping by. And I
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a lot of cold water that I've thrown on my idea that I've been nurturing for a few years.
Yeah, I bet.
So by the time I got to the elevator, though, I figured she was wrong. I just knew she was wrong. I knew somebody was going to start it, and
Right. So why not you?
so why not us, right? So I went back to my office and started working on a write-up for the thing because I figured, hey, the heck with it. HBO's not going to do it. I'm going to find another job. Then they'll be sorry. So I started writing. That's kind of a silly way to put it.
I'll show them.
I'm going to come back with the best comedy channel ever. And then they'll be sorry. Anyway, so I started writing it up and over the course of a few weeks. And I was going to staple it to my resume, honestly, and send it out to Viacom and Paramount and all the other places, see if they wanted to do it and give me a job. I was young and had no reputation in the business. So what did I care, right?
Right.
So along the way, as luck would have it, my boss's boss was walking by my office. He said, what are you working on? I said, this idea for a new channel I have, He says, well, let me see. So he looked at it. He goes, wow, this is great. I said, really? He said, yeah. He says, I think Michael Fuchs, the chairman of HBO, should see this right now. I said, right now? He said, yeah, come on, let's go. We're going to his office. I had no presentation materials. I had no idea what I was going to say. And by the way, Michael Fuchs had just been named 2 weeks earlier as the most powerful man in Hollywood by the New York Times Magazine in a cover story.
So no pressure.
No pressure. I mean, if I got in the elevator with Michael Fuchs accidentally on my way to work, I'd break into a sweat. This guy could destroy your career, probably have you killed, with no trouble at all. I was afraid of him. And we were about to walk into his office with no appointment. And that's what we did. And Michael looked up and said, the hell are you guys doing here? That's really what he said. Without an appointment, which was unsaid, but that's what he meant. And my boss's boss, name was Larry. Larry said, Art has an idea. I think you ought to hear it. So I pitched my idea. I pitched my little heart out, gave him the whole vision that someday this thing will be the center of the comedy universe. And HBO really has an opportunity here. And he bought it. He said, you know what? We should see if that'll work. Let's do some tests. Let's make a demo tape. Let's do some research, do the finances. Boom. And
Cool.
That's how we get started.
All right, cool.
So talking about the success from your career, going from HBO to Comedy Central, like you were just talking about, obviously, since you were turned down the first time you mentioned it, not every idea is a success. So how do you deal with the failure? And do you have sage advice because of your years of experience? Do you have sage advice for people who are struggling with those feelings of failures outweighing their successes currently?
Yes. The way I did it and the way I recommend other people do it is you have to look for, even in failure, there's little glimmers of hope and success somewhere. I always point out that whatever your job is going to be useful to you in your next job, whether it's good, bad, whether you succeed or fail. You're going to pick up stuff that's useful in either getting your next job or doing your next job. And that's the way it works. So there's that hope right off the bat. With me, and you talk about Comedy Central as if it were a success. The name of my book, it's a memoir called Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor. Now, the reason I subtitled it that is because people think that Comedy Central has always been successful. Wow, it's a big successful channel. It's really great. We were the worst, most horrible, disastrous failure in the first year. It was just, I can't explain to you how embarrassed Michael Fuchs was about the whole thing and how bad it was. And the press creamed us. And they said we weren't funny. We were the Gong Channel. We were Michael Fuchs flat on his face, on and on. And I had started the whole thing. Now, how do you think I felt? Bad. If you're thinking bad, you got that right. I felt bad and I felt responsible, but I looked for little glimmers of hope and success. And the first little glimmer of hope and success was Mystery Science Theater 3000. And that's probably something that's familiar to a lot of your audience.
Very much so.
That came in the mail before we launched. I kid you not. The head writer, who was named Eddie Gordetsky, said, he came in one day, he said, "Hey, we gotta have a, that's how he talked. We gotta have a show where comedians watch movies and make jokes." And we said, "Yeah, that's a good idea, Eddie." So Eddie went off and started developing that show. And then a week later, literally, in the mail, we get a cassette and there's a letter with it. And it said, "Hey, we hear you guys are starting a comedy channel. Is this something that would interest you?" And it was Mystery Science Theater 3000, the tape. They'd been producing it at this like UHF station in Minneapolis. We flew out there immediately. I mean, this was like a dream come true. But, at that moment, I thought, okay, win, lose, or draw. One of the hopes for a comedy network was that innovative comedy would come to us. And there it was before we even launched. This show would never have made the air without a comedy network in the world. It would never have been on NBC or HBO or any of those channels. Just wouldn't have. And it would have been lost. But there we were. So that was my glimmer of hope then.
Nice.
Excellent.
So we like to look for suggestions about different types of recreation and fun. So like, how do you keep yourself recharged and your creative mind focused?
Well, music has been sort of a constant through my life. My mother was a piano teacher. We were required to play piano before we did anything else, including eat. Before we watched television, we had to practice. I had two brothers. It was a horrible thing. It was abuse, but that's how we grew up. And I learned to love piano. I grew up on classical piano, but when I got to New York City, I decided I want to play jazz. So in my 20s, I learned how to play jazz piano, which, talk about keeping you on your toes. Jazz piano is very difficult, especially after classical. And then when I was much older, I won't mention the age, but it was 10 or so years ago. I don't want to scare anybody. I took up jazz drums for the same reason. I just said, man, wow, jazz, it's cool. What are those drummers doing? I can't even figure it out, right? But I noticed that the drummers were always the guys playing and dancing. They were always moving and dancing. They looked like they were having the best time. Miles Davis, he didn't look like he was having such a great time. I wanted to be a drummer. So I learned how to play jazz drums, and I love that. And talk about diverting. You can't be thinking about too much else while you're playing piano or drums. You just can't. Mm-hmm. It's really focused. It really focuses you. The other thing is I like skiing. We're getting into my hobbies now. And we also recently took up scuba diving, which I got to recommend to everybody. What a riot that is, if you don't mind, a sport that's really characterized by don't die at every minute. Don't die. This is really cool, but don't forget not to die. No, it's not. That's why I went into it. It's really not that bad. It's really a lot safer than that. But
I've always wanted to do scuba diving.
Well, I recommend it. It's really fun.
And it's not because I can't talk right now, so we're gonna cut all that out. But the reason I haven't done it isn't because I'm afraid of the water or anything like that. I love swimming. We're very water friendly people. I just, over in the area of Michigan, which I live, the lakes that are by us, I don't think would be very fun to scuba in. So, I keep thinking that maybe if I went out to Lake Michigan, that'd be more fun. But
here's the thing. You're going to learn how to scuba dive in a pool. And I know this is important information for your listeners, so I'm going to go through it.
Extremely.
You don't have to really live in any particular place to have a scuba diving teacher in a pool. And I'm sure there's one like within 5 miles of your place. Secondly, yes, you have to travel to go scuba diving because not everybody's lucky enough to live, in the Hawaiian Islands or, near the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. So yes, you're going to do some traveling, but that's not so bad either. And you get to see some of the most beautiful things in the world underwater. So don't stop because you live in Michigan. I went to school in Michigan, by the way. And if I had stopped there, it would definitely not have been as interesting a life. Get out, see the rest of the world.
There you go. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about your book. Okay. Now you wrote the book again. And what's the title again?
It's Constant Comedy: How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor. And it's a
Perfect.
memoir. It's a memoir.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I had that at the top of the page, and I was just too lazy to scroll up, so I asked you. We'll be real honest right there.
No problem.
So let's tell the listeners a little bit what they can look forward to in the book and why they need to go snag a copy for themselves, and perhaps even what's your favorite part of the book writing process.
Well, you're asking me to do a commercial for my book, which I'm happy to do. I wrote a memoir. Again, it's not a history, but it is the story of how Comedy Central got started.
Sure.
Because I thought it was, really the greatest adventure I had in my career. And there's lots of crazy, funny people in it, as you can imagine. And as I pointed out about the subtitle, it was hard. It was very difficult. And I wanted to make that clear to people. I think it also, why should people read it? 2 reasons. One, it's funny. It is funny. It's not all funny. It's not like a comedy book,
Right.
but there's lots of funny things that happen, and I make it funny in places. But secondly, for anybody who's interested in working in a corporation or a company for that matter, or in the film and television business or the entertainment business, this is an unvarnished look at what it's like to be there. It's really, the whole thing, the politics, people getting fired, the fun, the craziness, the good news, the bad news. And I honestly spent a lot of time, Tim, talking to students, film students, business school students, about just that. And they all say the same thing, like, wow, is it really like that? And the answer is yes, it was really like that. And you don't know, you can't tell it's really like that unless you do it or you read my book. Those are the 2 options.
All right, that's fair enough. So, in thinking about that, I like your approach, the fact that it's, not a biography, but a memoir. I think that's a very important distinction between the two. That it's because typically in biographies, I think that themes kind of get glamorized a little bit to make things seem a little bit better than what they were. But I think in a memoir, it's a little bit more of a truth telling of what actually happened and how things are going down and things like that.
Yeah, let me tell you, Tim, in order to write memoir, and I found this out by taking a class first in writing memoir, and then I took a number of them, you have to turn yourself inside out. You can't write a memoir without telling, important and very personal sometimes truths about yourself, not just about what happened, but more about how you feel. How did I feel at the time? So if I were going to write this as an autobiography where everything was going great, I wouldn't have told the stories about how I was scared to death and how I was, pummeled by Bridget in that meeting. And those aren't the stories that get told by people who write histories. The stories that get told by people who write memoirs are those stories, the tough times. And I think that's why people read memoirs.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's a very cool thing to do. So where are people able to find your book?
Well, it's available at Amazon and the other online booksellers. Also, you can get it in bookstores. It's in bookstores. And if you want to find out about that or other things about me, you can go to my website where I have information about my book and where to buy it, some other writing. It's artbellwriter.com.
Okay, cool.
Excellent. We'll be sure to get those links and put those in our description down below. And another question for you. So we have a Facebook group, and it's the Funny Science Fiction page, and it was created basically to share memes with people. And so the funny usually comes from people combining this with this. And what are 2 sci-fi things that you enjoy that you think you could combine to create a comedy?
I think science fiction and kids is a great way to do comedy, because I think that kids dealing with their parents in a sci-fi situation, like say a kid invented a time machine, right? And he's going back and forth in time. And he comes back and he tells his parents, I just checked out myself in the future, and it turns out I'm the leader of the free world. And the parents are like, would you just get back there and do your homework? You know, I mean, we don't want to hear this stuff. And just the crazy things that might, I mean, that's a circumstance that might be a great place to take off from.
Interesting.
But I think kids are generally a good place to start when you want comedy.
Found a question in a past interview that you were a part of, but I think that it's still a relevant question, and I think it's one that our followers would actually like to know. So the entertainment industry, like everybody else, is trying to navigate these new waters and trying to figure out their norm during this completely unnormal time. So how do you think that the comedy business can and should reinvent itself?
Well, it's a good question. And I think most businesses, you're right, are going to reinvent themselves to a certain extent. Stand-up comedy in particular is a discipline that requires a relationship between the performer and the audience. And the big stopper to stand-up comedy has been this Zoom thing where you cannot get instant feedback from the audience. And that's the lifeblood of stand-up comedians. I mean, so that really put a damper on the whole thing. I'm not going to suggest that the Zoom boom is going to, persist so much in stand-up comedy. I don't think it will. On the other hand, I think that comedy found other outlets online through the Zoom boom and other things, and TikTok, for example, where suddenly, okay, if you got to be funny, we'll find ways to be funny on the internet, and again, I think TikTok's a good example of that. People are funny in their tweets and everything else. A friend of mine is fond of saying there's comedy everywhere now. It's not just Comedy Central putting comedy up there. It's everybody's doing comedy. And I think even I've seen stand-up comedians not so much alter their act, but come up with a new act, that's not stand-up. It's a completely different approach to comedy in this mode. So I think that if there are going to be changes, that's what's going to happen. But I think the purest form of stand-up comedy is a guy or a gal, a brick wall, a mic, an audience, and a couple of drinks. And that is not going anywhere. I think as things get better, all of that's going to come back.
All right. So before we wrap up here, I have one question for you that the other two we're not aware of, and I'm sneaking it in here just because I'm curious. So if you could recommend one piece of science fiction, whether media or written literature, to introduce somebody to science fiction, what would it be and why?
That's an easy question for me because we already went through this. I would do Ray Bradbury's Golden Apples of the Sun. You know that book, the collection of short stories?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I am.
The reason I recommend Ray Bradbury is because he wasn't only a great sci-fi writer, but he was also a great writer, and his characters and the personalities and the exploration of his characters in whatever situation they were in was so perfect and beautiful, and listen, we can think of the famous ones like Sound of Thunder, which I'm sure your audience is familiar with, where, they go back to the past and the hunters get to hunt a dinosaur, kill the dinosaur, but they can't step off the path because they can't disrupt anything. And of course, what happens is they step off the path, and that causes the future to go completely ridiculously awry when they get back. And it's just, that's been done a million times in sci-fi. It's just been, it's the butterfly effect. It's been done over and over. It was probably done before him. It'll be done after him. He did it beautifully. He really did it. He just nailed it is the way I got to say it. So yeah, I would and have recommended that to people when I talk about sci-fi.
All right. Very good. All right, so before we let you go here, Art, we do want to play a quick quiz game with you. It's the
what if I lose?
Oh, we're getting to that. Don't you worry. All right, so
there are always consequences.
It's a fun sequence, Kathleen. Get it right. All right, so
I was going to let you use your silly word.
Sequence.
It's a fun sequence. All right, so it's a 5-question quiz. All the questions are multiple choice, so we'll try and make it somewhat easier on you. If you get 3 of them correct, we're going to send you one of these super cool I Gave to the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund coffee mugs, which is loosely based upon Star Trek and the Red Shirts. And then if you get 4 questions right, we're going to send you that mug along with this book right here, Custodians of the Cosmos, which is written by Drayton Allen, the founder of our Facebook group. Okay. Which is about a young man who wanted to join in with Starfleet, washed out, couldn't hack it. So he became a custodian on one of the starships to boldly clean up after those who boldly just went. So now, however, if you get less than 3 questions correct, so 2 questions, 1 question, we take a picture of you. We make a
0 questions. You didn't mention 0.
Well, I was hoping for at least 1.
There better be a softball question in that thing.
I hope so.
Yeah, we're hoping so. We'll find out.
If not, it's Nick's fault.
It's all Nick's fault. We'll blame Nick. We're happy with that. But we'll take a picture of you and make a meme out of you and put it on our Facebook group. Okay with that? It's look. There's only 100.
My lawyer's just calling in. Let me just take this.
There's only 122,000 members, so not very many people will see it.
Okay.
So.
And you'll be
that's
in
a relief, right?
good company with Dan Povenmire.
Yeah.
The creator of Phineas and Ferb. He got memed.
Oh, really?
He did.
Yep.
I'm gonna get.
There's
memed.
a couple others. I don't remember.
Wait
who
a
else is in
second.
our
Can I
meme
just
world.
retire now and say meme me because why waste everybody's time here today with 5 questions I don't know the answer to? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you might. You might be surprised. These are all based on 1950s sci-fi.
Okay.
You have a fighting chance, sir.
I think. And
that's
if
true.
not, blame Nick.
And again,
Okay.
if it doesn't, if you suck at it, just blame Nick. We're okay with it. All right, Nick, lead us in.
It's actually me first.
Oh, Kathleen, that's right. Kathleen, please get started with the quiz.
All right. Question 1. Which movie does this tagline belong to? A Titanic beauty spreads a macabre wave of horror. Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Teenagers from Outer Space, or The Amazing Colossal Man?
Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Correct. And that
So
might
we
be your
got
softball
one.
question.
Yes. I'm so happy. Can I go tell my wife? Hold on. All right,
got one
go
right.
ahead.
The idea of a doomsday machine was reused in a 1966 Star Trek episode. What movie inspired it? Was it Gog, Kronos, or Spaceways?
See, that's interesting. I was going to say Dr. Strangelove, but that's not one of the choices. Give me the choices again.
Gog, Kronos, and Spaceways.
All right, I'm guessing Kronos.
You are correct.
Well, 2 for 2.
Yes. Wait a second. What year was Kronos?
Nick, what year was Kronos?
I don't know. I just pulled the quiz off the internet.
Oh, you believe that crap on the internet?
If it was on the
you know
internet,
what?
it
If
must
it's-
be true.
if it's
Abraham Lincoln
after-
told him so.
If it's after 1960 when Dr. Strangelove was written, you're up the creek. But
It was 1957.
oh, phew. All right, so Strangelove stole it from that. Okay, good.
All right,
to know.
question 3. Which was the first sci-fi space adventure to be made after World War II? The Thing, Destination Moon, or Rocket Ship XM?
Rocket Ship XM.
Correct.
3 for 3. You got a coffee mug.
I'm in the money now.
That's
You are
right.
out of
I am
meme
in the
land.
money.
You are in the money round.
Okay.
In what category did 1953's The War of the Worlds win an Academy Award? Was it Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, or Best Visual Effects?
I'll go with visual effects because it's obvious, but it's probably not that.
It is correct.
Remind me to never go to a
Now
pool
I'm
ball
nervous.
with you. We have a shark in our midst.
All right.
I
And
love that movie, by the way.
question-
That was a great movie and a great book.
It was.
Mhm.
Question number 5. Which film is a loose retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest, War of the Worlds, Forbidden Planet, or The Day the Earth Stood Still?
Forbidden Planet.
Correct. You just aced this quiz.
All right.
You went
I'm
5 for
so
5.
proud of myself.
Apparently,
You know,
Nick gave
I
you
look for
all off.
one good thing to happen to me every day, and it's not even like 3 o'clock.
You did it.
And I
You got
did
your
it.
good thing.
All right, Nick,
All
way to
right,
give him
I'm
5
so proud
softballs.
of
All right.
I'm gonna cry. Hold on.
Underestimated him.
All right. So, Art, you've won yourself a coffee mug.
Okay.
And a book.
You've won yourself a book. And we'll make sure that Drayton puts some calligraphy in the front of it for you. Okay.
Thank you. That would be great.
But yeah. So, and after we say goodbye to everybody, don't hang up right away. We want to make sure that we get your shipping information. We really do want to send you those. Okay.
Okay. Can I plug one more thing?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
go ahead.
Definitely.
My friend Vinny Favali and I, who were there at the beginning of Comedy Channel, decided to do a podcast in honor of the 30th anniversary. It's called the Constant Comedy Podcast, and we're talking to people from way back at the beginning. It's been so much fun. We
Awesome.
did talk to Kevin Murphy, who plays Tom Servo and has for 30 years on Mystery Science Theater 3000. One of the best conversations we had. I thought your audience might be interested in that. It was really a lot of fun.
Absolutely. That's great.
They can
where
find
we
that
fi-
on my website or, wherever you get your podcasts.
What was the name of it again? Constant Comedy?
The Constant Comedy Podcast with Art Bell and Vinny Favali.
Perfect. All right. We'll make sure that we get people to know about that. Nick,
Right.
how are they going to know about that? Because I'm stepping all over Nick's lines today. And Kathleen's.
It's all
Where
right.
where would people go to?
I know you. He had
You
already
already
mentioned them,
mentioned
but
all
can we
this.
mention them again so that we don't lose?
We're going to fix all this in post because I am just tripping
Geez,
over
I
all
hope
my
so.
shoelaces.
No, I think you should keep it. Come on. This is behind the scenes kind of stuff. The bloopers.
This will be in our blooper reel for sure.
We should just
How
start
did Tim
releasing
screw
it
us up
earlier.
this day? Well, here's the reel.
I don't know. We've got some pretty good bloopers. We could put out a funny science fiction blooper reel.
Very easily.
I'm buying. Yes, you can find my podcast by either going to my website, artbellwriter.com, and going to the podcast tab, or to iTunes or wherever else you get your podcast.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks.
And we are going to make sure that we put your website in our description, in
Thank you.
addition to the other things that you mentioned earlier when Tim
Beautiful.
messed us all up again.
And see, that's how it's supposed to go,
appreciate
right
it.
there. Okay. All right. So,
appreciate
kids, we want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to ensure that we get a continuation of amazing guests like Art Bell and funny moments for you to listen to when I screw things up. But please subscribe. It's going to help our show more than you're ever going to know. And of course, be sure to check out Art's book, Constant Comedy, his story about going into starting Comedy Central. And then also you're going to want to check out his podcast, the Constant Comedy Podcast. That sounds like it's going to be a hoot, and he's got some great guests coming in over there. So check out what they're doing over there. Now, if you're not happy with the content of our videos, and trust me, we've given you plenty of reason today for you to not be happy. All you have to do is submit in duplicate form, of course, and the head of our complaint department, funny man Richard Pryor, and although I can't repeat what he's going to say about your complaint and why you're complaining about it, I assure you that it was going to be both funny and insulting, yet extremely effective in another way. He'll get it taken care of.
Thanks again, Art.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
guys.
everyone, and thank you for watching.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort that you'll give Red Shirt Crewman number 56. You'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and goes on stage going into can't say that word. You'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and goes on stage going into anaphylactic shock from the tomatoes 9 minutes after the second set, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back, and the tomato-stained com badge.
On behalf of the rest of the hosts of Funny Science Fiction, we'd like to thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to be a guest on one of our future episodes, please contact us by means of our Facebook group, Funny Science Fiction, You can find us on Twitter or Instagram using the handle @FunnySciFi, or you can go to DraytonAllen.com and click the Contact Me link at the bottom of the page. Thanks again. Hope you enjoyed the episode.